Breaking news. Dark Eagle has become central to the crisis and put the Iranian regime on high alert. This Thursday, April 30th, 2026. Information circulating in Washington indicates that the United States Central Command has requested authorization to deploy the Dark Eagle, the U.S. Army's hypersonic missile, to the Middle East. Amid the standoff with Iran, the naval blockade of Iranian ports, and the dispute over the Strait of Hormuz. I'll tell you all about that in a moment, but right now you'll want to be subscribed to the channel to stay well informed. Real-time information with the best journalistic quality you've ever seen. With the standard of credibility, Milson Alves. The main point is straightforward. Washington wants to increase the pressure on Tehran without relying only on ships, fighter jets, and sanctions. The new option on the table. It's a long-range weapon designed to hit sensitive targets in protected environments. Bloomberg reported that the United States Central Command requested the deployment of the Dark Eagle for possible use against Iran. The justification would be to reach ballistic missile launchers moved to deeper areas of Iranian territory, beyond the range of other available systems. The report makes it clear that this is a military request, not a final order to fire. Even so, the request already carries weight as a threat. In crises of this magnitude, the mere arrival of a strategic weapon changes the adversary's calculations. The Dark Eagle is officially known as the United States Army's long-range hypersonic weapon. A report from the Congressional Research Service, released by USN News, describes the system as a ground-launched missile system with a hypersonic glide body, a reported range of 1,725 miles, and capability aimed at time-sensitive and well-defended targets. Also, according to this report, the weapon travels at Mach 5 or higher, that is, more than 5 times the speed of sound, with a trajectory that can make detection and interception difficult. That's where the fact becomes significant. Iran has spent years relying on concealed facilities, protecting depots, spreading out launchers, and using the depth of its own territory as a shield. Dark Eagle seems to be a response to this logic. It's not a weapon made for speeches, it's a tool of pressure. It enters the picture to show that distance, tunnels, and delaying maneuvers no longer guarantee the same security as before. The crisis doesn't happen in isolation. The United States naval blockade on Iranian ports has already greatly reduced Tehran's ability to sell oil. According to the United States Central Command, there were 41 oil tankers holding about 69 million barrels of oil that the Iranian regime couldn't sell. The same report pointed out a drop of more than 80% in exports compared to March. For Tehran, this is the most painful point. Oil finances the state, supports part of the military machine, and feeds the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. When that money gets stuck at sea, the pressure is no longer just diplomatic. It affects the cash flow, the fuel supply, the ability to pay allies, and to maintain the appearance of strength. That's why the blockade is not just a naval barrier. It's a direct economic squeeze on the heart of the regime. Iran tries to respond with threats. Iranian officials say that the presence of the United States in the Gulf is a provocation. They state that Hormuz will not be reopened under pressure and promise a reaction if new attacks occur. But the reality is more difficult for Tehran. The economy is being strangled, maritime trade is under surveillance, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard needs to show strength precisely at a time when it sees its room for maneuver shrinking. In this scenario, Trump keeps up the pressure on two fronts. On one side, the economic front, blockade, sanctions, and financial isolation. On the other, the military option with fighter jets, ships, surveillance, and now the possibility of the Dark Eagle. Washington's goal is to force Iran to accept real limits on its nuclear program and reduce the threat of ballistic missiles. For the White House, a vague promise of future talks is not enough. The demand is that Tehran back down in a verifiable way. The Iranian regime tries to sell resistance at home. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps talks about victory, sovereignty, and control of the Gulf. But this rhetoric faces a practical problem. Idle ships don't generate revenue. Blocked oil doesn't bring in cash. Hidden missiles don't guarantee security when an adversary power is preparing longer-range systems. Rhetoric may fire up state TV, but it doesn't solve the pressure at sea, in the market, or at the negotiating table. In this context, Dark Eagle serves as a warning. Washington doesn't need to say it will attack tomorrow to provoke unease in Tehran. It's enough to show that they have a new tool, fast and hard to contain. The regime's fear isn't just about the strike, it's about the uncertainty. If the system reaches the Middle East, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps will have to spend energy, move resources, and review defenses. The United States Army had already been preparing the system. In December 2025, the Army itself announced the activation of a battery designated to operate. The official publication stated that hypersonic systems combine speed, range, maneuverability, and altitude to defeat critical targets in a short time. In other words, this is not an improvised piece for a headline. It is part of a military project that now comes into view amid a real crisis. For the Gulf nations, this development carries a different weight. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and other economies in the region depend on the security of maritime routes, the flow of energy, and predictability in the Strait of Hormuz. When Iran threatens to turn the passage into a political tool, it doesn't just pressure Washington, it pressures the entire region. And when the United States brings a hypersonic weapon into the debate, the signal to these allies is that American protection can still be taken to the next level. The most important point is that the crisis has reached a stage where every move has a psychological and economic effect. If the Dark Eagle is approved for deployment, the Iranian regime will have to deal with a new layer of pressure. Even if it isn't used, the threat already serves a political purpose. It shows that Trump is willing to maintain the pressure, increase the cost of resistance, and leave the Islamic Revolutionary Guard with no breathing room. There's also a warning. Hypersonic weapons alone don't solve a war, and Washington knows that. The real power is in the combination. Naval blockade to cut off revenue, sanctions to close financial pathways, tough diplomacy to demand retreat, and military force ready to prevent Iran from using missiles, oil, and Hormuz as a shield. This combination is what turns Dark Eagle into more than just a missile. It becomes part of a maximum pressure strategy. Tehran is now trying to buy time. The regime talks about conditions. It tries to push negotiations back. And it seeks to keep its nuclear program as a card to ensure its survival. But the United States seems to have understood that too much time favors Iran. Each week of delay may allow the Islamic Revolutionary Guard to reorganize stockpiles and try to recover sales routes. That's why the pressure is increasing right now. What is happening right now is the emergence of a new military threat within a crisis that is already suffocating Iran. And the possibility of a hypersonic missile makes it clear that Tehran's period of comfort may be coming to an end. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.